The grease pencil slipped on the wet tape of my rifle stock. Rain. Through the static, I heard Neptune 1 scream, "Pinned down." Then Command's reply, "Hold position. QRF Quick Reaction Force is 30 mics out." I looked at my threat map. 40 red marks closing on 12 blue ones. I wiped the scope lens. Today, the map gets redrawn. Rain here wasn't weather. It was weight. Hammering teak leaves above, turning the jungle floor into mud 800 meters below. I lay prone on a platform of woven branches 60 feet up in the canopy. Invisible. My heart rate held steady at 52 beats per minute. Resting pulse. For now. I adjusted the focus on the Barrett M82A1, my 50 caliber sniper rifle. The rubber eyepiece pressed against my orbital bone, wet and cold. Through the glass, the jungle resolved into layers of green and grey. Movement at the Riverbed. Sector 4. Coordinates 3490. I didn't see men. I saw heat signatures and muzzle flashes. 12 SEALs. They were huddled behind a cluster of fallen logs and granite boulders in the dried riverbed. A bad position. Low ground. No exit vectors. The riverbed was a fatal funnel, a geographic trap designed to catch debris during a flood. Today, it caught men. I tracked the enemy fire. It poured from the tree line above them. Green tracers chewed up the rotting wood of the SEAL's cover. Splinters exploded like shrapnel. Crack thump. The sound of AK-47s reached me a split second after the flash. Distance, 800 meters. The physics of sound delay. Light travels fast, death travels slower. Wind, 4 miles per hour, full value from the left. I marked a new X on the strip of silver duct tape glued to my rifle stock. The grease pencil left a thick black smear. Target Cluster Alpha. Machine gun nest. The radio in my earpiece crackled again. The voice of Neptune 1, the SEAL team leader, cut through the white noise. It wasn't a scream anymore. It was tight, controlled panic. The sound of a man who knows the geometry of his own grave. Any station. Any station. This is Neptune 1. We are pinned. Enemy force 40 plus. We have 2 wounded. Request immediate QRF and air support. Over. I watched a SEAL drag a limp body deeper into the shadow of the rock. Blood looked black in this light. A young SEAL's trembling hands applied a tourniquet. Fast hands. Desperate talk. The silence on the net stretched for 6 seconds. Eternity. Then came the voice from the sky. Overwatch. Command. A woman's voice filtered through encryption and distance, stripped of all adrenaline. Captain Chen. She sat in an air-conditioned container 50 miles away, staring at a screen that reduced this mud and blood to blue icons. Neptune 1. Overwatch copies. QRF is inbound. ETA, 30 minutes. Air support unavailable due to weather. Hold your position. Click. The link went dead. 30 minutes. The number hung in the humid air. 30 minutes was a lifetime in a firefight. In 30 minutes, a platoon could be wiped out, their bodies stripped, and the enemy vanished back into the tree line. I looked through the scope again. I shifted the crosshairs to the right flank. The enemy wasn't static. They were moving, flowing like water around a stone. 3 fighters detached from the main element. They stayed low, moving fast through the ferns. They wore mismatched fatigues but moved with unit cohesion. Not amateurs. They were closing the net. I did the math. The SEALs had 12 guns. 2 were out of the fight. 10 effective shooters. The enemy had 40. 3 machine guns. High ground, flanking initiative, rate of fire, ammo consumption, cover degradation. I ran the numbers 3 times. The result was always the same. In 5 minutes, the enemy flankers would reach the cliff edge. They would have a clear line of sight into the riverbed. Enfilade fire. It would be a slaughter. Command said, wait 30 minutes. The reality on the ground said 5. Physics didn't care about the chain of command. Gravity didn't care about rules of engagement. My orders were clear. Observe only. Gather intelligence. Do not engage unless compromised. I was a ghost, a recording device with a pulse. My job was to watch, log, and report. If I fired, I ceased to be a ghost. I became a target. I broke protocol. I risked the mission, my career, the court-martial. I risked the exposure of a covert listening post that had taken 3 weeks to establish. I looked at the duct tape on my stock. The grease pencil markings were a chaotic map of the battlefield. MG1. MG2. Flank right. I looked at the seals. 10 men fighting for seconds. One of them was firing a SAW, the brass cascading into the mud. He was suppressing the center, unaware that the real death was creeping up on his right. My finger hovered over the safety. The metal was slick with oil and rain. I breathed in. 4 seconds. The smell of wet decay in gun oil filled my nose. I held it. 4 seconds. Carbon residue. Sweat. I breathed out. 4 seconds. If I did nothing, I would watch them die in high definition. I would log the time of death for 12 men. I would write the report. Subject: Neptune 1. Status: KIA. Cause: adherence to procedure. No. I shifted my weight on the platform. The branch groaned under me. Negligible noise. Masked by the rain. I reached up and adjusted the elevation turret. Click. 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 3 clicks up. 800 meters. The brass detents felt gritty. Sand in the mechanism. I checked the windage. The leaves 80 yards out were fluttering left to right. 2 clicks left. I wasn't an observer anymore. I cycled the bolt. The massive spring compressed and released, stripping a .50 caliber round from the magazine. It slammed into the chamber with a mechanical clack that vibrated through my chest. A promise of kinetic energy. Safety off. The red dot on the selector switch was a tiny eye staring back at me. Command was wrong. The math was absolute. ETA. 30 minutes is a death sentence. My hand moved to the comms unit on my chest rig. The plastic was slick with rain and condensation. I didn't tremble. Tremors threw shots. Tremors killed. I rotated the frequency dial. Click. 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 Channel 1 was command. Dead air and refusal. Channel 2 was local logistics. Empty. Channel 3 was emergency. Monitored, but useless without extraction assets. I stopped on Channel 4, the Fill 4 preset. It wasn't a hack. Hollywood hacks were for movies. In the real world, encryption keys were physical commodities, traded in briefing rooms and forgotten on servers. I had pulled the Fill 4 keys from a joint task force server 6 months ago, a cached set of naval special warfare inter-team frequencies intended for a training exercise that never happened. Old keys. Dormant keys. But valid keys. I pressed the load button. A chirping handshake tone echoed in my earbone. Syncing. Syncing. A green LED flashed once on the radio body, authenticated. I was in. And just like that, I was also flagged. The moment that green light blinked, my radio ID Reaper 6 was stamped onto the naval digital log. A permanent digital footprint in a classified network. I had just created the evidence for my own court-martial. Unauthorized access. Violation of communications security protocols. Interference with a Tier 1 operation. The charges would be accurate. I didn't care. The map in my head was redder than the map on the screen. I keyed the mic. The plastic button had a heavy throw, requiring deliberate pressure. Neptune 1. This is Reaper 6. Radio check. Over. Static hissed. Then, the sound of the world ending broke through. The audio quality on the SealNet was chaotic. Automatic weapons fire wasn't a popping sound here. It was a digital tear, a distortion that peaked the microphone's input limit. I heard shouting, screams, the distinct, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of a SAW gunner trying to suppress a target he couldn't see. Break, break, a voice cut in. Not Morrison, someone younger. Left flank. I see movement left flank. They're in the ferns. Suppress it, Martinez. Get that gun up. I waited for a gap in the noise. There wasn't one. I had to make one. I keyed the mic again. Neptune 1. This is Reaper 6. Immediate traffic. The transmission cut through their local chatter. The power of my radio, boosted by my elevation and the directional antenna woven into the tree branches, overrode their handhelds. Silence. For 1 second. Then Morrison's voice came back. It was breathless, ragged, stripped of the calm he had shown command. He sounded like a man trying to hold back a landslide with his hands. Who the hell are you, and how did you get this net? The question was an accusation. He thought I was command interference. Or worse, enemy psyops. It happened. Enemy signals intelligence jumping on a freak to taunt or confuse. I didn't offer a name. I didn't offer rank. Names didn't stop bullets. Data did. I am an elevated asset, 800 meters northwest of your position, I said. My voice was flat, monotone, the voice of the machine. I have visual on your perimeter. You are taking effective fire from 3 machine gun positions, north, northeast, and east. Get off this net. We are combat effective and engaged, Morrison yelled. The stress in his voice was a physical vibration in my ear. You are not combat effective, I corrected. You are fixed. I count 40 hostiles. A flanking element is moving to your cliff edge. Coordinates 3495. They will have enfilade fire on your position in 4 minutes. I watched the flankers through my scope. They were moving faster now, emboldened by the SEAL's lack of suppression. One of them stopped to signal the others. I adjusted my focus. I could see the sweat on his neck. 4 minutes, I repeated. Once they reach the ridge, your cover is negated. It becomes a kill box. On the radio, I heard the younger voice again. Skipper, I see them. Movement at the ridge. He's right. They're flanking. Morrison paused. I could hear his breathing. Harsh. Rapid. He was processing the impossible. A voice from the sky. Knowing his ground better than he did. Predicting his death with mathematical certainty. Who are you? He asked again. Quieter this time. I'm the one with the solution, I said. I dialed windage. The leaves were still fluttering left to right. I added a half click. The rain was intensifying, creating a wall of water that would drag the bullet down. I added a click of elevation. Physics. Variables. Solutions. I have a 50 caliber solution for your machine gun problem, I said, and 20 rounds of intervention. Command said nowhere, Morrison said. They said 30 minutes. Command isn't here. I am. I watched the lead flanker kneel. He was setting up a base of fire. He raised an RPK light machine gun. He was preparing to rake the SEAL's position from the side. Wait for QRF and die by the book. Or let me work. This is a closed net, Morrison said. You are unauthorized. He was clinging to protocol. It was the last thing he had left. The only thing that made sense in the chaos. I watched the RPK gunner chamber around. They are setting up on your right, I said. 300 meters, high angle. If that gun opens up, you lose your medic and you're wounded. How do you know that? Because I'm looking at him, crosshairs on his sternum. I tightened my grip on the pistol grip. My finger slid into the trigger guard. The metal was cold. Do you want my help or not? The question hung there. It wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. I was offering him a lifeline, but he had to grab it. He had to be complicit in the violation. Static hissed. The rain drummed against my helmet. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Reaper, 6. Morrison's voice came back. The anger was gone, replaced by the cold clarity of survival. This is Neptune 1. You are authorized to engage. Priority targets are the machine guns. Danger close is in effect. Copy, I said. Danger close. Clear to fire, he said. Green light. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The contract was signed. The audit trail was established. We were both rogue now. I shifted my weight, settling the stock deep into the pocket of my shoulder. I exhaled, emptying my lungs of air, emptying my mind of the court-martial, the logs, the rain. There was only the math. Range, 800 meters. Wind, 4 miles per hour, full value left. Rain drag, coefficient 0.1. Target, machine gun Alpha. Sandbagged position, north sector. I found him. The gunner was firing long bursts, the muzzle flash blooming like a rhythmic flower in the grey light. He felt safe behind his sandbags. He felt powerful. He was wrong. I focused on the centre of the thermal blob. Breathe, aim, squeeze. Green light. The authorization didn't change the physics. It didn't change the wind, the rain, or the 800 meters of humid air between my muzzle and the target. It just changed the legal status of the bullet. I was no longer an observer. I was a participant. I settled into the rifle. The rubber eye cup formed a seal against the orbital bone of my right eye, shutting out the jungle, the rain, the world. There was only the circle of glass, the reticle, the math. Check the workspace. I scanned the immediate area around the muzzle, a hanging vine, a cluster of wet teak leaves. FOD, foreign object debris. In aviation, FOD, destroyed engines. In sniping, a single leaf grazing a .50 caliber bullet at the muzzle could deviate the trajectory by 3 feet at 800 meters. I reached forward and snapped the twig. It fell silently into the canopy below. Clear. I returned to the scope. Target 1. The machine gunner. North sector. He was firing in rhythmic bursts. Thump, thump, thump. Green tracers arced from his barrel, chewing into the SEAL's position. He was the anchor of the enemy line. The loudest voice in the conversation. I dialed the magnification up to 12x. The image wobbled with my heartbeat. The reticle danced. Boom, boom. Heart. Boom, boom. Heart. I needed the space between the beats. I inhaled through my nose. The smell of wet bark and CLP gun oil. I exhaled. I paused at the bottom of the breath. Respiratory pause. The wobble stopped. The crosshairs settled on the centre of the gunner's chest mass. Range, 800. Wind, 1.5 mils left. Lead, static target. Squeeze. The trigger broke at exactly 3 pounds of pressure. The rifle bucked. Recoil shoved my shoulder back. The scope went black for a microsecond as the optic recoiled. Gas vented. A pulse of overpressure slapped the leaves around me. I forced my eye to stay open. Follow through. At 800 meters, the bullet takes time to arrive. 1.2 seconds. A lifetime. In the scope, the image resettled. I saw the impact. There was no cinematic spray, just a sudden, violent transfer of kinetic energy. The gunner was hammered backward, lifted off his bipod, as if yanked by an invisible cable. He didn't scream. He didn't flail. He simply collapsed into the mud behind his sandbags. The RPK machine gun tipped sideways, barrel pointing uselessly at the sky. The noise from the north sector stopped. Silence roared after the shot. I cycled the bolt. The massive action slid back, ejecting the hot brass casing. It tumbled off the platform and fell 60 feet to the jungle floor. Cling. I shoved the bolt forward. The next round chambered with a metallic slam. Down in the riverbed. The enemy didn't know what had happened. They heard the crack of the bullet, passing. But the sonic boom masked the origin. They were looking at the seals. They were looking at the ground. Confusion. That was my second weapon. I shifted the rifle. 3 degrees right. Target 2. The assistant gunner. He was scrambling toward the fallen weapon. He wasn't trying to help his comrade. He was trying to man the gun. A professional. He reached for the grip. I centered the crosshair. Breathe. Pause. Squeeze. The rifle roared again. The assistant gunner spun violently and dropped. He landed across the legs of the first man. 2 shots. 2 bodies. The machine gun nest was now a grave. Target. Cluster. Alpha neutral. I said into the radio. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. Flat. Detached. Adjust fire to the flankers. The enemy line rippled. I could see it through the gaps in the ferns. Heads turning. Shouting. They realized the fire was coming from high angle, but they couldn't triangulate it. They stopped advancing. The momentum of their assault broke against the wall of uncertainty I had just built. I watched a fighter, in the second element, dive behind a thick mahogany tree. He was yelling into a radio handset, looking wildly at the ridgeline opposite me. Wrong direction. Good. I prepared to engage him. Click. The sound cut through my earpiece. It wasn't the static of the rain. It wasn't the squelch of a radio-breaking transmission. It was distinct. Mechanical. A relay engaging. I froze. I knew that sound. It was the sound of a signal being bridged. Someone else was on the net. Someone with a high-gain antenna, boosting the signal to a remote listener. Neptune 1. Check your net. I whispered. I heard a relay. Say again. Reaper. Morrison's voice was breathless, filled with the noise of his own return fire. I'm busy. How? There's a third party. Someone just keyed a relay. I scanned the frequency spectrum on my display. A tiny ghost spike flickered on the edge of the channel. Paranoia. Ordata. I pushed it down. Later? The threat map had priority. I looked back through the scope. The fighter behind the mahogany tree stuck his head out. He was trying to spot the shooter. Target fixation. He was looking so hard for me he forgot to stay hidden. I adjusted for wind. The rain was picking up, pushing the air harder. 2 clicks left. Don't look for me, I whispered. You won't like what you see. I squeezed the trigger. The jungle didn't stay confused for long. War is a learning environment. The survivors on the ground weren't amateurs. They were veterans of a dozen border skirmishes, hardened by attrition. They couldn't see me, but they could do the geometry. Crack thump. A bullet shredded the teak leaves 2 feet above my head. Snap whip. Snap whip. They were triangulating. High angle. North quadrant. They didn't need a precise grid. They just needed a general direction and volume of fire. Suppress the canopy. A voice yelled below. Faint, but distinct. The air around me turned into a wood chipper. AK-47 rounds. 7.62 by 39mm. Punched through the thick branches. Bark exploded. Leaves disintegrated into green confetti. A round struck the main limb of my platform, sending a tremor through the wood that vibrated into my chest. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a squirrel in a tree that was being cut down by a chainsaw. Move. I grabbed the drag handle of my pack. I didn't have time for a graceful descent. The enemy fire was intensifying. They were walking the rounds toward my tree. They were bracketing me. I clipped my carabiner to the fast rope line I had rigged 2 days ago. It was a hasty escape route. 11mm static line anchored to the trunk. I rolled off the platform. Gravity took over. The harness bit into my thighs and groin. The friction of the rope through the figure-8 descender hissed, heating the metal until I could smell the burning aluminum through my gloves. I plummeted 60 feet in 4 seconds. Leaves whipped my face. Branches clawed at my fatigues. Thump. I hit the jungle floor. It wasn't a soft landing. I landed in a crouch, but the momentum drove me into the mud. My knees slammed into a root system. Pain flared. A hot, white spike, but adrenaline smothered it instantly. I unclipped. The carabiner snicked open. I was down. But down meant blind. Up in the canopy, I was a god. Down here, I was just infantry. The ferns were waist-high. The visibility was 20 meters. The rain was a deafening roar on the broad leaves of the undergrowth. I grabbed the M110 SASS, the semi-automatic sniper system. The Barrett 50 cal was still up in the tree, cashed out. Too heavy to run with, too slow for this range. The M110 was lighter, faster, a scalpel for the close fight. I moved. Not a sprint. A sprint makes noise. A sprint triggers the predatory reflex. I moved like smoke. Low. Fluid. Placing each foot with deliberate care to avoid snapping twigs. Crack! A bullet struck the tree I had just vacated. Then another. They were pouring fire into the empty platform. Good. Let them kill the wood. I flanked right. West. I needed an angle. I needed to see the riverbed without exposing myself to the flankers. I pushed through a wall of vines. The humidity was a physical weight, pressing down on my lungs. Sweat stung my eyes, mixing with the face paint and the rain. Movement. 40 meters, 2 o'clock. A flash of mismatched camo, a rifle barrel, one of the flankers, a disciplined flanker signaling with gestures. He was moving fast, confident. He thought he had the sniper pinned in the tree. He was hunting. I raised the M110. No time for math, no time for windage. Snapshot. I put the red dot of the offset sight on his center mass. Pop pop, 2 rounds. Double tap. The flanker crumpled. He didn't even twitch. I didn't stop to check. I kept moving. Shoot and move. Static is dead. My lungs burned. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. 160 beats per minute. Fine motor skills degrading. Tunnel vision setting in. Breathe. Control. I forced a deep inhalation. I expanded my peripheral vision. Another target. Left. He saw me. He was raising an AK. I dropped to a knee. The mud was slick. Treacherous. I slid, correcting my aim as I fell. His muzzle flashed. A round snapped past my ear, the sonic crack so close it felt like a slap. I fired. 1 round. Headshot. The target dropped. I scrambled up, mud coating my knees and elbows. I was panting now. The clinical detachment of the canopy was gone. This was a brawl. Dirty. Chaotic. Close. I checked the magazine. 16 rounds left. Threat map recalculated. The main force was still suppressing the riverbed. My flankers were dead or dying. But there were more. There were always more. My radio crackled. "Reaper 6, this is Neptune 1, Morrison's voice. "Urgent. We have movement to the south. They're moving toward the LZ. Repeat, enemy element moving toward the extraction point." I froze. The LZ. The clearing, 3 kilometers away. If the enemy reached the LZ first, the helicopters couldn't land. The SEALs would be trapped. They would die in the mud, carrying their wounded. "Copy. Neptune 1. I gasped. "How many?" "Unknown. A squad-size element. They're bypassing us." They weren't just adapting. They were evolving. They realized they couldn't dig the SEALs out of the rocks, so they were going to cut off the exit. I looked at my watch. T-minus 20 minutes. The enemy had a head start. They had a trail. I had 3 kilometers of dense, unmapped jungle. I looked at the M110. I wasn't a sniper anymore. I was a sprinter. "I'm moving," I said. "I'll clear the path." I didn't check the windage. I checked my laces. And then I ran. I ran. The jungle floor was an obstacle course designed by treacherous roots and vines. Roots snagged at my boots. Vines whipped my face, leaving welts that stung like paper cuts. The mud sucked at my soles, trying to steal my balance with every step. My lungs burned. The air was too thick, too hot. It felt like breathing through a wet wool blanket. Boots thumped on mud. The sound of my boots on the soft earth was the only rhythm in the chaos. Behind me, the jungle was alive with noise, shouting. The crack of AKs firing blindly. The enemy was adapting. They had realized the sniper wasn't in the tree anymore. They were sweeping the area. But more importantly, a squad was moving south, toward the LZ. I checked the mental map. The trail to the LZ was a dogleg, winding around a steep ravine. It was the only walkable path. The enemy would take it. It was fast, clear, and predictable. If I took the trail, I would be behind them. I would be shooting at their backs while they shot at the SEALs. A losing equation. I needed to be in front of them. I reached the edge of the ravine. It was a 40-degree slope of mud, slick rock, and rotting vegetation. A vertical drop of 60 meters into a creek bed, then a brutal climb up the other side to the LZ flank. A shortcut, or a broken neck. I didn't slow down. I threw myself over the edge. Gravity took me. I slid, boots digging into the mud, surfing the landslide. I grabbed at saplings to check my speed. Bark stripped off in my gloves. My shoulder slammed into a tree trunk. Crunch. Pain flared in my deltoid. I ignored it. I tumbled the last 10 feet, landing in the creek water with a splash that sounded like a gunshot. I was up instantly. The water was cool, shocking my heated skin. I scrambled up the opposite bank. This side was steeper. I clawed at the mud, using roots as ladder rungs, my fingernails packed with dirt. My breath came in ragged, sobbing gasps. Climb, climb, climb. I crested the ridge. The LZ was below me. A patch of elephant grass flattened by wind and rain, surrounded by a wall of dense jungle. I scanned the perimeter. Nothing. No SEALs. No enemy. Just the rain and the waving grass. I checked my watch. T-minus 10. I had beaten them. By seconds. I moved into position. A thick mahogany tree with surface roots that formed a natural barricade. I slid in behind it, bringing the M110 up. My hands were shaking. Adrenaline tremors. Control. I forced the rifle into the V of the root. A solid rest. Then they appeared. North side. The tree line rippled. Mismatched fatigues. AK-47s. RPKs. They moved with purpose, spreading out along the perimeter of the clearing. They weren't just patrolling. They were setting up an L-shaped ambush. They knew the helicopters were coming here. They knew the coordinates. A seed of cold logic planted itself in my gut. How? The LZ coordinates were encrypted. transmitted only to Neptune 1 and the pilots. Unless... Focus. The enemy point man raised his hand. They stopped. They were waiting. Then, from the west, movement. The SEALs. They burst out of the jungle, a ragged line of exhaustion. 4 men carried 2 stretchers. The rest formed a protective diamond, weapons outboard. They were running, stumbling, driven by the desperation of men who know they are out of time. The enemy point man leveled his rifle. He was going to wait until they were in the open. A kill zone. I didn't let him. I centered the crosshair on his chest. Squeeze. The M110 coughed. The suppressed shot was a sharp thwip in the humid air. The point man dropped. The ambush was triggered early, prematurely. "Contact front!" an enemy voice screamed. The jungle erupted. Green tracers slashed across the clearing. I shifted fire. Target 2. RPK gunner setting up on a log. Pop, pop. Down. Target 3. Rifleman sprinting for better cover. Pop. He stumbled and fell. Neptune 1, break right. I yelled into the comms. Corridor is open on the south flank. Move to the tree line. Morrison heard me. I saw him wave the team toward my position. Moving! Cover us! I poured fire into the enemy line. I wasn't sniping now. I was suppressing. I was creating a wall of lead between the hunters and their prey. A corridor of safety. Bullets snapped around my position. Bark exploded from the mahogany root. Dirt kicked up into my face. I didn't flinch. I reloaded. Clack, clack. Fresh magazine. The SEALs reached the edge of the clearing near me. They dropped the stretchers, taking up firing positions. "Where's the bird?" Morrison yelled, his voice raw. Then we felt it before we heard it. A vibration in the chest, a thrumming in the ground. The treetops bowed. The Black Hawk came in low and fast, a dark shark cutting through the grey sky. It didn't hover. It flared hard, bleeding speed, the tail rotor skimming the canopy. Jet blast. Downwash hit. Physical blow. Grass flattened into green ocean. The wind screamed, tearing at my clothes, stinging my skin with flying grit and water. Rotors thumped. Drowning gunfire. It wasn't just wind. It was force. Kinetic energy repurposed as lift. The helo slammed onto the mud, the wheels sinking inches deep. The side doors were open. No miniguns, no door gunners. Just a slick transport, Morrison yelled, waving. Load, load, load. The SEALs grabbed the stretchers. They ran into the rotor wash, heads ducked against the hurricane. I stayed behind the route. I fired 3 more rounds at muzzle flashes in the north tree line, keeping their heads down. Buying seconds. The last SEAL disappeared into the cargo bay. Morrison stood on the ramp, hanging on by a strap. He looked at me. He waved. "Come on!" I looked at the enemy line. They were recovering. They were standing up, firing at the giant mechanical bird sitting in their field. I fired one last round. Then I broke cover. I sprinted toward the ramp. The jet blast pushed against me, a wall of hot exhaust and pressure. It felt like running into a solid object. I dove onto the metal floor. Morrison grabbed my vest and hauled me in. "Go! Go! Go!" The pilot pulled pitch. The turbine screamed. The ground fell away. I lay on the diamond plate floor, chest heaving, staring out the back ramp. The jungle receded, turning into a green blur. I saw the enemy fighters rush into the clearing. They fired at us, tiny sparks of defiance against the sky. They stood exactly where the LZ coordinates said they should be. They hadn't been hunting us. They had been waiting for us. They knew. The thought was colder than the rain. I looked at Morrison. He was checking his wounded. He looked relieved. I wasn't relieved. I was calculating. A leak. A timeline mismatch. The mission was over. The war had just begun. The Black Hawk hit the concrete. The tires chirped. There was no cheering. In the movies, extraction is the end. The music swells. The heroes limp off the ramp into the arms of a grateful base, cigars and back slaps. In reality, extraction is just the start of the paperwork. The turbine engines wind down to a mournful groan. The rotor blades slowed, slicing lazy shadows across the blast walls. I sat on the diamond plate floor, covered in dried mud and carbon, the residue of work. Morrison stood up. He patted the shoulder of his lead medic. "Get them to the CASH unit now." The medics rushed the stretchers down the ramp. Urgent. Efficient. I didn't move. I watched the reception committee. They stood in a line near the hangar, 2 military police officers, and a woman in a crisp, clean operational uniform. No mud, no sweat, just sharp creases and a clipboard. Captain Sarah Chen, Sector Overwatch. The auditor. She wasn't smiling. She checked a digital watch. "Welcome home," I whispered. I grabbed my pack and slung the M110. The weight was familiar, a structural part of my skeleton. I walked down the ramp. The tarmac heat slapped me. Dry, aggressive. It smelled of JP-8 fuel and burning rubber. Morrison stepped forward to meet Chen. He was covered in blood. She looked like a spreadsheet. "Captain," Morrison rasped. "We need to debrief, but my men need—" Chen didn't look at him. She looked at me. Her eyes tracked over the mud and stopped on the rifle. "Secure the weapon," she told the MPs. One MP stepped forward. "Sergeant Parker, weapon and comms gear. Please." Morrison stiffened. "She saved my entire platoon. You want to disarm her on the flight line? Standard procedure for unauthorized discharge and comms violation," Chen said. "Flat, monotone, weapon, logs, now." I looked at Morrison. He was ready to fight. He didn't understand the machine. The machine doesn't care about saves. It cares about liability. "It's okay, sir," I said. I cleared the chamber. Clack, clack! A live round spun onto the tarmac. I handed the rifle to the MP. The weight left my shoulder, leaving a strange void. Then I pulled out the Fill 4 encryption keys, handed them over. I felt naked. "Follow me," Chen said. She walked toward the TOC. We followed. We walked past mechanics wrenching on a Chinook. No one looked at us. We were ghosts returning to the grave. The briefing room was cold. Fluorescent lights exposed every speck of dirt on my face. Chen slotted a data card. The wall screen flickered. A digital map of the sector. "Sit," she said. Morrison leaned forward. "If you're building a court-martial, I authorized the engagement. It was a retroactive order." "I know," Chen said, not looking up. "I have the voice logs. You get a reprimand. She gets a psych eval. We move on." Morrison blinked. "Then what is this?" "The anomaly." Chen pointed at the screen. "Look at the timestamps." I looked. The numbers were clear. 14:30 hours, command transmits extraction order. 14:34 Neptune 1 confirms. Chen highlighted a red line. Enemy movement. "Reconstructed from your helmet cam," she said. 14:26 Enemy Squad Bravo moves south. 14:28 Enemy Squad Bravo establishes ambush at LZ. The silence pressed against my eardrums. Math didn't add up someone inside. They moved 4 minutes before the order was sent, I said. Chen nodded. "Correct." "They guessed," Morrison said. "It was the only viable LZ." "No." I stood up and traced the map. 3 possible LZs. Bravo was the worst option. A kill box. We only picked it due to weather data transmitted at 14:29. Chen's eyes sharpened. "And the enemy's set up at 14:28, 2 minutes before you decided." "Leak," I said. The word hung in the air. Chen pointed at screen. "Leak at 14:26. She slid a paper across the table. "An NDA. Sign this." "Why?" Morrison asked. "Because if they knew where you were going, Chen whispered. They are listening right now. If they know we know, they'll burn the source. We need them to think they got lucky. I picked up the pen. 1426. The moment soldiers became pawns. I signed. Nain Parker. Good. Chen took the folder. The metal snap echoed. Go shower. Leave the rifle in the armory. She walked out. The door clicked shut. Morrison looked old. They set us up. Yes. Who? I looked at the black screen. I thought about the click on the radio. The timeline mismatch. Someone with the keys, I said. I looked down at my hands. The grease and carbon were still there, ground into the fingerprints. And now, I said, we have to find them. The air in the annex was recycled, stale and cold. It smelled of ozone and overheated server racks. I sat in a corner, my back to the wall. I held a plastic cup of lukewarm water. My hands were clean now, scrubbed raw with industrial soap, but I could still feel the grit of the jungle under my fingernails. Morrison was gone, debriefing with his chain of command, fighting for his men's careers. I was alone with the ghosts, and Captain Chen. She sat at a terminal, her face illuminated by the blue glow of scrolling logs. She hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. The only sound was the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of her typing. Come here, she said. It wasn't a request. I stood up. My knees popped. The adrenaline crash had left me feeling heavy, like my bones were made of lead. I walked over to her station. Look at this, she said. She pointed to a waveform on the screen, a jagged green line representing radio frequency activity. This is the spectrum recording from your sector during the engagement, she said. Her voice was clinical. Do you see the anomaly? I leaned in. I squinted. There, I said, pointing to a spike at the 400 megahertz range. Interference? No, Chen said. Handshake. Chen tapped key. The waveform expanded. At 14:25, 4 minutes before the extraction order was sent, a burst transmission went out from the jungle floor, encrypted, high gain. The enemy doesn't have that capability, I said. They use analog radios, walkie, talkies. Exactly, Chen said. She brought up another window, a log of network traffic from the FOB's own secure router. At 14:24:58, an authorized user accessed the tactical weather database. They queried the ceiling data for the ridge, LZ. Who? I asked. The login ID belongs to a maintenance officer who has been on leave in Guam for 3 days, Chen said. She looked at me. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. Someone used a dormant account to check the weather, she said. 2 seconds later, a burst transmission goes out to the enemy. 1 minute later, the enemy moves to the only LZ that the weather rules out. The math was cold. It was precise. It was terrifying. It wasn't a leak, I whispered. It was a relay. Someone inside the wire, Chen said. Someone with access to the dormant accounts. Someone who knew we would check the weather. Screen flickered, logs scrolling. She closed the windows. The screen went back to the neutral grey of the desktop. This isn't an insurgency, she said. This is a procedural exploitation. The words hung in the air. We weren't soldiers. We were variables in an equation, a compromised network. The timing indicates a break in protocol. And you did, Chen said. She wasn't accusing me. She was stating a fact. You proved that the human element is the only variable they can't predict. So what now? I asked. Chen reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small, black USB drive. This is the raw data, she said. The logs, the waveforms, the proof. She held it out to me. Why are you giving me this? I asked. Because I can't file it, she said. If I put this in the official report, it gets flagged. The people who ran the test will see it. They'll know. We know. And they'll burn the evidence, I said. And us. Exactly, Chen said. She placed the drive in my hand. It was warm. "You're a ghost, Parker," she said. "You observe. You calculate. You act." "I'm a soldier," I said. "Not anymore," Chen said. "Soldiers follow orders. You follow the math." She turned back to her screen. She started typing again. A new report. A sanitized version. Subject: ambush. Cause: intelligence failure. Status: resolved. A lie. A necessary, calculated lie. "Keep it safe," she said, not looking up. "Keep it hidden. Until we find the other end of that relay." I closed my fist around the drive. It felt like a bullet. A round I hadn't fired yet. "Who is Eva Tran?" I asked. Chen stopped typing. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't," I said. "I saw it. On the maintenance log. Before you closed the window." Chen looked at me. There was something new in her eyes. Fear? Respect? "Eva Tran died 2 years ago," she said. "In a training accident." "Then who logged in?" I asked. Chen turned back to the screen. "That," she said, "is the question you need to answer." She hit enter. The report was sent. The lie was official. "Get out of here, Parker," she said, "before someone realizes you're not just a sniper." I walked out of the annex. The night air was cool. The stars were bright, indifferent. I looked at the logistics warehouse in the distance. A dark, silent block of concrete. Someone was in there. Someone watching the weather. Someone selling death by the minute. I put the drive in my pocket, next to the roll of duct tape. I wasn't done. The mission was over, but the hunt had just begun. I started walking, not toward the barracks, toward the warehouse. The math didn't balance yet, and I never left an equation unsolved. The office was clean. Not sterile like the briefing room, but curated, mahogany desk. Framed commendations. A view of the airfield where C-17s were swallowing pallets of gear. I stood at parade rest. My dress uniform felt stiff. The fabric scratched at the healing cuts on my neck. Morrison stood next to me. He was clean-shaven, his uniform pressed. He looked like a recruiting poster, except for the eyes. His eyes were still in the riverbed. Captain Chen sat behind the desk. She didn't look up. She was reading a file. "My file. The after-action report has been filed," she said. She closed the folder. It made a soft thump on the wood. "The official finding is that Neptune 1 encountered a target of opportunity while on a routine patrol. Staff Sergeant Parker provided overwatch and neutralized the threat. No rules of engagement were violated. It was a clean story. A safe story." Morrison shifted his weight. "And the leak, ma'am?" Chen looked at him. Her face was a mask of professional boredom. "There is no evidence of a leak, Lieutenant. The enemy movement was attributed to routine patrol patterns." "That's a lie," Morrison said. "That is the finding," Chen corrected. Her voice didn't rise. It just got harder, like concrete setting. She slid 2 envelopes across the desk. "Your new orders." Morrison picked his up. He opened it. He read the paper, his jaw tightening. "USS Gerald Ford," he said. "Training officer, carrier group." "It's a promotion, Jake," Chen said. "You're out of the field. You're safe." "I didn't ask to be safe," Morrison said. "The Navy needs trainers," Chen said. "Men who know how to survive." She looked at me. I didn't reach for my envelope. I knew what was in it. "Go ahead," she said. I picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive. Transfer orders. Department of Naval Intelligence. Special Activities Division. Compartmented. No unit name. No location. Just a code. "You're pulling me from the teams," I said. "We're reclassifying you," Chen said. "You have a unique skill set, Sergeant. You see patterns. You see the math." "I broke protocol," I said. I accessed a secured net. I fired without authorization. Yes, Chen said, and you were right. She stood up and walked to the window. She watched a forklift load a crate onto a plane. The system failed yesterday, she said. We almost lost 12 men because of a glitch in the algorithm. We need someone who can spot the glitches before they happen. You want me to hunt the leaks, I said. She turned back to me. I want you to be the failsafe, she said, the one who sits in the dark and watches the watchman, and if I say no, then I file the real report, she said, court-martial. Dishonorable discharge. Prison, it wasn't a threat. It was a calculation. A binary choice. I looked at Morrison. He was watching me. He knew. He knew that the woman who climbed out of the jungle wasn't leaving this room. Sniper dead. Asset born. I'll need my rifle, I said. No, Chen said, you won't. She opened a drawer. She pulled out a small, grey, hard case. She placed it on the desk. You won't be shooting anymore. Nain. You'll be listening. I stared at the case. It wasn't a weapon. It was a terminal. A key to the digital panopticon. I looked at my hands. The calluses from the bolt handle. The stain of the grease pencil. I was being erased. My history. My name. My career. All wiped clean to serve a new function. Why? I asked. Why me? Chen looked me in the eye. For a second, the mask slipped. I saw the fatigue. I saw the fear of the unknown threat that was still out there. Listening, because you didn't trust the order, she said. You trusted the math. She sat back down. The meeting was over. You ship out in 2 hours. Transport is waiting. Morrison turned to leave. He stopped at the door. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and silver. He walked back to me. He placed it in my hand. It was a roll of silver duct tape. Half used for the map, he said quietly. He didn't salute. He didn't say thank you. He just nodded. Acknowledgement between survivors. He walked out. I stood there, holding the tape and the orders. The weight of them was different than the rifle, but just as heavy. I looked at Chen. I'm not free, I said. Chen didn't blink. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. You're still useful. That's the price? I turned and walked to the door. I didn't look back. Outside, the sun was shining. The air was warm, but I felt cold, despite the warm air. I walked toward the black SUV waiting on the tarmac. The driver opened the door. I got in. The door closed. The lock engaged with a soft, electronic click. I looked at the roll of tape in my hand. I looked at the dark tinted window. I pulled a grease pencil from my pocket. I wrote on the glass, 14:26. The start time. I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was a variable, and the equation was still unbalanced.